In today's video, we're going to go through where I think one of the best undervalued assets, aka buy low opportunities, are within the city of Toronto, but particularly in downtown Toronto. We'll get to it. Let's start. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. As always, thanks for tuning in for another video. You can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, my office information, and my TikTok. Feel free to use that contact information to get in touch with me with any questions you may have with regards to topics covered in this video, topics covered in previous videos, or any general inquiries whatsoever. Lastly, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support in that regard would be greatly appreciated, but you're not obliged to do so whatsoever. Enough of that. Let's get to the point of today's video, which is my perspective and my look upon Regent Park, where I think it can actually be claimed to be not only a undervalued asset, but as a consequence of it being a undervalued asset, it representing a very, very good buy low opportunity for a lot of people. Now, in this video, I'm gonna have the general buyer in mind when I make that claim, meaning an end user or a investor. Frankly speaking, I think this area on both fronts at a general level is pretty good and can be described as a buy low opportunity. By no means do I believe though it's a perfect area, and I have some criticisms to levy against it, right? I always try to be fair and objective. Let's start with a general look at the area itself first with relation to downtown Toronto. Thereafter, we're gonna go through some prices and some sales data. And then, obviously final thoughts as always. So before we get into the area in particular, let's look at a big picture right now, right? Regent Park is in the eastern half of downtown Toronto, where we define it as its own community as Regent Park. As we will see in the more in-depth look with regards to the area and where it's located, the surrounding areas of Regent Park are quite underdeveloped and somewhat sketchy, to be quite honest. Now let's first look into the area a little bit more in depth so you guys have a better understanding of what we're talking about and what surrounds the area. So as a point of reference, let's start with the central parts of downtown, where we see here, where off the bat we see with this, obviously simple Google Map 3D model we have here, we see central downtown, right? You have the CN Tower here. Just to zoom in a bit, right? You have the Rogers Center, then you have pretty much the core downtown, St. Lawrence Market, Old Toronto, downtown Toronto, waterfront, right? You have the Gardner, you have the City Place condos, and the further we go, we'll see the Fort York condos and Liberty Village, and further north we go into downtown, as north as you can get in downtown, obviously. We see our way all the way to, obviously North York and Midtown, right? Mostly Midtown from here. So as we see, a lot of development, right? Obviously, there are still lots, there are still parking lots, there are still depreciated storefronts and depreciated apartment buildings, but not a lot, right? Now, if we just direct our gaze here towards the eastern part of downtown, we surely, first off the bat, do not see as much development as if we were to focus our gaze once again with regards to central downtown, but even western downtown. Look, there's so much development occurring here that has already also occurred as well, and so much more that will come, in the Niagara region, Fort York, further west of that even, right? Whereas when we look into eastern downtown, right, there is less of that occurring. Now let's zoom in a bit more into what I'm particularly talking about. Let's use Dundas as our point of reference, right? This is about where Dundas is, right? Yonge and Dundas Square is here. So the further we zoom in, the more we see that, yes, there is some development occurring on the east side of Dundas, but if we just keep going, and obviously this is from the Google Maps, in terms of real life commute, this would be a good 15 to 20 minute walk. We see that pretty much after Jarvis there isn't a lot of high to mid rises, with a few exceptions, new builds, pretty much residential purchases, sale condominiums, once again, with a few exceptions, all the way until Regent Park. And might I add that this model for Regent Park is not accounting for, obviously you see here construction, and you see further construction here as well, but it's not accounting for how far the construction has really truly came, right? So what you have in essence is a concentrated, selected group of condominiums, all mostly 90% by Daniels, in one immediate area that I feel like is a very underrated area for lifestyle purposes. Obviously, you have your Regent Park walking area and General Park. You have a very good community center with a pool. You have your soccer field and multiple basketball courts. And you're relatively close to, the distillery district further south and the water, right? Of course, it's not immediate. So you have a lot of development that has occurred in this small pocket and more development that's going to come. But what's surrounding it is not much. And especially with regards to the distance between Regent Park and core downtown, these areas are, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, somewhat sketchy. You do have your homeless issue that occurs in midst of these areas. You do have depreciated storefronts, and you also have a lot of purpose-built rentals, right? Not purchase and sell condominiums, but once again, purpose-built rentals. And once again, of the older, more depreciated variety, you have parking lots, right? So in essence, if we look at where Regent Park is located within the context of the greater downtown Toronto area, I guess, if you want to put it like that, what we can say in summary is you have your immediate vicinity of highly developed area with a lot of end user lifestyle amenities within distance of the core downtown, but everything in between, and obviously we're in this case only using Dundas as an example, but we could as easily use Queen Street as an example. Everything in between, in some parts of Moss Park and some parts of Cabbagetown and some parts of Corktown, is less developed and more depreciated, both in terms of lifestyle and what's available. And as a consequence, Regent Park won't be as expensive and highly sought after as the other areas we will discuss in this video, such as, Waterfront and Bay Street corridor, Church Yonge corridor, Yonge Bloor, wherever, Niagara, obviously City Place, even though City Place I'm not that keen on. So that's why it's generally less expensive, and we'll go through the numbers a little bit more in detail, right? I'm going to give you some points of references in terms of prices and condo values. So thus far we've established that it's in its own pocket, the surrounding areas are somewhat sketchy and underdeveloped. It is less expensive as a result of that, but guess what? Builders, as we looked into the west, right, builders are running out of lots in definitely central downtown Toronto, but in the western portion of downtown Toronto, right, even the further west we go, right, builders are slowly running out of lots, and what lots remain are under strict limitations with regards to city ordinances, in terms of Kensington Market, for instance, right? So some builders will go after less expensive lots in the eastern half of downtown Toronto, and will develop around Regent Park, so in Cabbagetown South, right, in parts of Corktown. And I went through one of the most recent examples of this, which is 252 Church, when I did the pre-construction preview. Now, I wasn't a fan of that project. I'm pretty sure I gave it a lukewarm review, and I said it's solely a location play, and of course that also is closer to Yonge and Dundas than it is in Regent Park, just to be clear. But I've made videos in the past explaining how parking lots are selling for $70 million in this part of downtown Toronto. There's a lot of competition for the lots in this part of downtown Toronto, so there's a lot of development coming to this part of downtown. And once again, before we get into more in depth in terms of the numbers, if we assume the premise that I'm establishing, that this Regent Park area in of itself is already a very good area in terms of lifestyle and has more room to even get better in terms of the safety of the surrounding parts, once development comes, I think the first area, right, that's going to see the biggest growth in condominium values and property values will be this already established Regent Park area that is very Daniels heavy. And I'll also touch on that as well, right? So now that we looked at the area, let's look at some sales data, right? To just see where it ranks with regards to other areas in downtown Toronto. And let's start the numbers and sales with reference to 1 bed and 2 bed condos, right? So let's not try to look at condos overall, although we can. I thought we'll be a little bit more specific. When we rank, for instance, 1 bedroom condo prices thus far in 2022. So starting out from January 1st of 2022 to the date of recording of this video, which the date of recording of this video is February 15th, we see, for instance, that as a point of reference in Regent Park, the average sold price of a 1 bedroom condominium is $709,000 with a median sold price of $695,000. Now, when the median and average are quite close to each other, it shows us that the series of data, right, in terms of sold prices in this case, are quite compact, meaning in part that this area in our sample length of time has not seen a variety of sold data, like not, for instance, one sale in the 3 millions and another sale in 580. The sales range is much more compact, right? In part, that is due to the fact that right now Regent Park is not that competitive. So you do not have a lot of bidding wars. Do not get me wrong. Properties are selling above asking price here, but more so of the case where it's around market value and it's selling $20,000, $30,000 above asking than the case of it being priced, like for instance, $300,000 below the most recent comparable sold, and you have 8 offers and it boosts it another $300,000 above that as well, right? So you don't have the rampant competition and bidding wars occurring. I'm not saying none. Also, I'm not saying none have sold above asking. I'm just saying it's a little bit more tempered here. So let's look at 1 beds, for instance, now in Bay Street Corridor. When we look at Bay Street Corridor, in the same time period, we see an average sold price of $814,000. But that's not surprising to you. I mean, if you know anything about downtown Toronto or the Toronto condo market, of course, Bay Street Corridor is going to be more expensive. But, a lot of people I think would be surprised where we see the gap being almost, not quite, almost being $110,000, around 105. Furthermore, if we look at Waterfront, for instance, we see the gap between 1 bedrooms. We see there the average sold price for 1 bedrooms has been year to date $712,000. So quite relatively close, by the way, to Regent Park in sold price, only $3,000 more. But you have to account for, once again, this waterfront condominium inventory represents first and foremost an average sold price derived from way more transactions, so the hundreds of transactions, to Regent's Park, relatively low amount of transactions thus far for 1 bedrooms in 2022. Thus, when you have more wide array of transactions and more wide array of inventory, right, your average might be a little bit lower, right, because there's more entry points in the data that will carry down the average. Let's go further west, another area, for instance, that we see in terms of average sold price, Niagara region in downtown Toronto. We see an average sold price of $733,000, right? But this is not to say all areas are higher, because actually when we look at, like, for instance, an area such as Church Yonge Corridor, we see that Church Yonge Corridor has a lower average sold price thus far into 2022. Quarter, you're looking at an average sold price of $686,000 for 1 bedrooms. We're only looking at 1 bedrooms right now, right? So that's actually one of the areas that's less than Regent Park. But one thing to keep in mind about Church Yonge Corridor, especially with regards to 1 bedrooms, is you have a lot of older 1 beds that are really good options, by the way, that can sell for really good PSFs. But of course, once again, these older 1 beds will have an impact of carrying down the average, right? There's a lot of good older buildings, by the way, in Church Yonge Corridor that I think are quite underrated as well, and I might actually include it as a second part to my underrated condo series. But interestingly enough, when we take the perspective towards 2 bedrooms, no longer looking at 1 bedrooms now, just 2 bedrooms, that same thing does not exist, wherein Regent Park is now less expensive than everywhere else, as was the case in with regards to one bedrooms, but even now with regards to Church Yonge corridor as well. Because when we look at Regent Park, the average sold price of a 2-bedroom in the same period now, January 1st to February 15th of 2022, was $862,000. That's the average sold price based upon 6 transactions. And the 1-bedroom number I provided you, that was based upon 10 transactions. So Regent Park has far less transactions thus far year to date than any other area. That's why some areas, once again, like Waterfront, will be close in price point, because Waterfront, you're looking at hundreds of transactions, right? Obviously, that's going to have an impact on the average sold price. But nonetheless, I digress. For 2 bedrooms, if we look at now Bay Street corridor as we did for 1 bedrooms, we see 1095, so $1,095,000 as an average sold price for 2 bedrooms in Bay Street corridor. Church Yonge corridor, once again, as I said, in contrast to 1 bedrooms, Church Yonge corridor has a higher price point than Regent Park, where in terms of 2 bedrooms, you're looking at an average sold price of $958. Continuing, C1 Waterfront, $1,034,000 for 2 bedrooms. Niagara region, average sold price of $931 for 2 bedrooms. But clearly, thus far, if we look at the numbers as we went through 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, we see that the gap between Regent Park and the rest of downtown Toronto is still existent, but far less with regards to 1 beds as opposed to 2 beds. 2 beds, the gap is much larger, wherein Regent Park 2 beds seem to be a little bit more undervalued as opposed to 1 beds. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, once again, both are the cheapest and most undervalued in Regent Park. Just 2 bedrooms, a little bit more than 1 bedrooms. So thus far, we've taken a good look at the area, established the numbers. Clearly, Regent Park 1 beds and 2 beds are much cheaper. 2 beds a little bit more, as I just said. So now let's get into the final thoughts, right? In the final thoughts, this is where I'm going to actually start talking about some of the downsides, right? First and foremost, there is a reason Regent Park is undervalued and cheapest. First and foremost, it's because it's a newer area. But as I went through, when we went through the look at the area with the 3D model, the surrounding areas can be classified as less desirable and a lot sketchier, of course. There's no shadow of a doubt about that. So we can classify the first criticism as a risk, because that is what you're betting on for that to improve. And as I went through in my retrospective, once again, in the area, there is a lot of development that's forthcoming to Regent Park. And with a lot of builders bringing their money in their development, shops, stores, renovated shops and revamped shops and stores, what you usually have, you have gentrification, which is typically used in a negative context, and I'm not gonna get into that, but there's no doubt with builders with money flowing into an area, gentrification comes along. Whether you're for it or against it, bad or good, you can't deny that. And another, value neutral statement that I think is quite fair is that due to the development, due to the builder's money and the commercial money coming to a certain area, it typically is in their best interest for it to be safer, more desirable as an area. But that is the upshot of what we're looking for. That is what the buy low opportunity is leveraged against, of course, right? But another criticism I have, and this is actually the biggest criticism I will have of Regent Park, is that the condominium buildings currently there, which we went through some of the main buildings and you saw it in terms of the model, the condominium inventory there, mostly Daniels, is pretty good. Daniels is a pretty good builder. The condominium inventory you have there by Daniels is pretty good in terms of build quality, but there's no spectacular condominium option, right? There is not that one outstanding building that I would say is fantastic. What you have is, at best, buildings that I would say 8 out of 10, right? 8.25 out of 10. You don't have your 9 to 9.5 buildings. You have really good buildings, but not great, outstanding, amazing buildings. You also have some average mediocre buildings. But the good thing is the average mediocre buildings are such due to floor plans or other factors, not so much due to build quality, because Daniels, although not Tridel, is top 2 to top 4, I would say, in terms of downtown Toronto builders. Which is leading me to my final thoughts, which is, in my frank opinion, Regent Park, for both end users and investors is a very good buy low opportunity if and only if you have a timeline longer than 3 years, ideally closer to maybe 5 years, but longer than 3 years for sure. If you have that timeline in mind for your end using purposes and your investment purposes, it makes it a very good buy low opportunity in my professional opinion. Not the only one, and it won't be the right fit for everyone and anyone. As always, I have to sit down with particular buyers to see what their particular criteria and their scenario is. But as general advice, I think Regent Park is a good buy low opportunity.